Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon. 3 o'clock on Wednesday. Welcome to another installment of Gaming in Holland's ongoing webinar series. Today's webinar concludes our current series. We will be back with you with another webinar in April. Let's wait a few seconds until everybody's joining the webinar here. Welcome for those who just dialed in. Today's topic is responsible gaming for licensed operators, obligations, implementation and technical solutions. As you all know, the Remote Gaming Act will enter into force on April 1st. This means that in a few weeks' time, the Netherlands Gambling Authority will start processing remote license applications. The Dutch Remote Gaming Act establishes a wide range of responsible gaming obligations for licensed operators, including a local responsible gaming representative, as well as mandated contacts with addiction care professionals and experiential experts. In this webinar, we will look at these legal obligations in detail and consider avenues for practical implementation and technical solutions. But before we kick off today's webinar, I would like to thank our strategic partners and sponsors. Without their invaluable support, we would not be able to do this. Thank you very much. Also, as always, our webinars are interactive. If you would like our speakers to answer one of your questions, please submit them through the Slido app. You can scan the QR code on your screen or visit slido.com and enter the event code GIH. QR code or slido.com and the event code is GIH. Next, select the Q&A tab on the screen to submit your questions. You can do this throughout the webinar, and at the end of the webinar, we will address some of these questions. With us today, we have three speakers who will share their respective insights on the topic of Dutch responsible gaming regulation and solutions. We have Sharif Ibrahim, attorney at law at Kalff, Katz and Franssen. We have Pieter Remmers, CEO of Assissa. And we have Emil Tybirk, AI developer at Mindway AI. Welcome. Sharif, Pieter, and Pieter Emil, welcome and thank you for being here. Let's begin by looking at the regulatory aspects of the Dutch responsible gambling regime. Sharif, I'm looking at you for this. Could you please explain what the responsible gaming obligations are that licensed operators will need to meet? And good afternoon and welcome from Amsterdam. Sorry, welcome to Amsterdam, Sharif. So what are the responsible gaming obligations licensed operators will need to meet?
Hi, Emil. Thank you. Good to see you again. They're quite elaborate to kick in an open door. What I'll do, I'll just run through the major requirements that are prescribed in the legislation, but I'll have to say this will not be a full list because the requirements are quite elaborate. I'll start off with the cooperation with experts in the field of addiction care and experiential experts. Operators will need to work together with both categories of experts in developing, applying, and maintaining their addiction prevention policy, for example. And should an operator deviate from those advices, it must be able to explain why when asked by the NGA, the Netherlands Gambling Authority. The second obligation is the risk analysis of the games on offer. And this means that an operator should employ scientific methods to analyze their risk game offering on the risks involved, the addiction risks. And examples of such scientific methods are Gamcard and Asterisk, but those are not; those are merely examples and not the prescribed methods. And in addition, addiction prevention policies and advertising policies should be tailored to the outcome of such risk analyses. The next training course, next is training courses for personnel, which can be divided actually in two: the basic courses, the supplementary courses. Basic courses are for a broader group of employees, and the supplementary courses are intended for those employees who have more to do with admitting players to play, monitoring play, or those employees who perform the addiction prevention policy, for example, when they have to conduct the conversations with players who show signs of excessive participation. Next, operators should provide players with information, and to make that a bit more concrete, operators should inform players of the risks of gambling addiction, should inform of the existence of their addiction prevention policy, highlight the possibility of self-exclusion, also inform about the Dutch addiction care system and anonymous help possibilities. And this is just a selection of those obligations. Then analysis and registration of gaming behavior, which means that operators should monitor internal and external signs of excessive participation and link intervention procedures to that, which is the bridge to the next obligation, the tiered intervention model, which can range from a mere email or pop-up notifying a player of, for example, exceeding playing time limits, to up to the final remedy of mandatory exclusion by registration in the Central Exclusion Register. So the severity of interventions must always match the type of playing behavior. Then there are some other obligations, like that addiction prevention measures should, the addiction prevention measure in relation to young adults, periodic reporting measures of the addiction prevention measures taken, and last but not least, the responsible gambling representative, which is a very new figure in the international gambling arena. And I'll get back to this in the next question in a bit more detail. And of course, last but not least, as already mentioned, operators should connect to the Central Exclusion Register crux.
Yeah, quite a few obligations there, Sharif. And that was really helpful. This leads to my second question. Could you explain to us what you think the biggest bottlenecks are for future license applicants with regards to this responsible gaming?
Yes, for this question, I'll limit myself to 3 topics of which we think and which we have seen in recently that are topics that lead to a lot of discussion. Those are the responsible gambling representative, finding the right experts, and the risk analysis of the games on offer. Let's start with the responsible gambling representative. Well, the first thing which pops up immediately, where to find such persons. You can either choose to train someone internally or hire someone externally to fulfill this position. And due to the requirements posed on this responsible gambling representative, the local responsible gambling representative, it can be quite difficult to meet all these requirements. For example, this representative must be available within 2 days digitally or 5 days in real life in the Netherlands. And there must also be, the representative must also have specific expertise in this field, either gained by experience or gained through trainings. So this remains a very important topic, and we see that operators are very busy in finding the right person or training the right person, because that's also a possibility. Then finding the right experts, so the addiction prevention experts in the field of addiction prevention and the experiential experts, the latter of which are people who have actually real life experience, for example, with gambling addiction. There are not many people who specifically specialize in this field. And what makes it more difficult that recently in the press there have been reports of the Dutch Addiction Association, which is actually the one association to which most major addiction prevention institutions have connected, has said that it will not itself provide advice on responsible remote gambling matters as an organization. But even more, they refer to, on the one hand, they refer to their individual members, but in the press it has also been reported that the Dutch Addiction Association has advised their members not to work together in this field. So this makes it even harder to find the right persons, and we hope that the NGA might give some guidance in this respect. I think also recently there has been an interview that the NGA will be able to maybe connect these experts with the operators, and so hopefully there will be something on this soon. And then thirdly, the risk analysis of the games on offer. This has become sort of a, well, not bottleneck, but a real point of attention, because previously the remote gambling policy rule prescribed that the risk analysis should be sent to the NGA at the time of application. That requirement has now been removed. But on the other hand, other documents like the remote gambling policy itself, the responsible gambling policy, and the decree advertising and prevention of addiction imply that the outcome of the risk analysis should be provided in the addiction prevention policy and advertising policy. So there's this bit of inequality, but it seems that anyway, the analysis should be completed and the outcome should be taken into consideration in the policy. And we would look forward to the NGA also taking a firm view to this in the possible Q&As on the website to clarify the situation. And on a connected note, we see that the industry has a lot of questions, especially nearing the 1st of April, and we're eagerly awaiting seeing more and more of these questions being answered in the Q&As on the NGA website to make it more subtle, more good transition into the application process.
Yeah, Sharif, that's a lot of bottlenecks and points you raise here. Really useful. For those who have more questions to Sharif, please go to slido.com or point your camera to the QR code at the right bottom of the slide and ask your question to Sharif and to the other speakers for later in the webinar. Thank you for now, Sharif. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next questions are for Pieter Remmers, who, as a leading responsible gaming expert in the Netherlands, will need no further introduction. Pieter, how are you? How's Amsterdam?
I'm very well, Willem. Thank you. And you?
That's good. Very well. Thank you. Thank you. Pieter, let's kick off with the first question for you. How can operators ensure that their staff, also referring to what Sharif said, that their staff will meet the qualifications as mandated by the responsible gaming regulations?
Okay, well, thank you. And maybe just as a follow-up of what Sharif tried to explain a little bit, because I'm focusing on quite a number of similar topics, so to say. Well, the simple answer is follow the law and the guidelines of the gaming authority. And if you don't have it, appoint qualified staff, so to say. But maybe I should say more into detail. When you have to organize training, you should organize basic modules focused on general awareness training for all staff. This can be done via e-learning or via face-to-face if you want to. And what's also necessary are the more in-depth training for all player-related staff. And all these trainings need to be repeated every 3 years, so to say. So every 3 years there need to be a follow-up training, which also is quite an exercise, I would say, for the institutes that are dealing with training sessions. What you definitely have to appoint, and Sharif mentioned it already, is a addiction prevention representative. Maybe I would even say you should look at quite a high level, maybe even C-level, CEO level, or management team level of the operator, because they are truly representing the operator within all the things that the operations are doing. But I mean, if your prevention representative is not qualified enough, then I mean they could be supported by organizations like Assissa, but other institutions in the Netherlands, or maybe even in individuals as well. You definitely have to pay attention to the risk analysis of the game, and I think that would be something which is going on, though. I mean, if you look at the recommendations of the Gambling Authority, in which they refer to the report of Dick de Bruin, which was published in 2017, they say that Asterix, well, in fact, there are not too many instruments that can be used in this matter. You have Asterix, CanCard, as Sharif mentioned. You have Seafrog, Mindway to a certain extent as well, but Pieter and Emil will tell you a little bit more about it. So that's important. And you also have to monitor and pay attention and make a risk analysis on the player's behavior, so to say. So in fact, what you have to do is describe your safer gambling, responsible gaming policy in an extensive and I would say understandable way. And you have to work together with true experts. Compared to the old situation, I would say before COA, I would say that nowadays as an operator you have to do twice your best to show and prove that you really do what you say you do and what you really want to do, so to say. Because Dutch law is not an easy one compared to most laws in other countries as well. But if you are able to fulfill your duties regarding safer gambling, responsible gambling, and you should not forget that it's all about know your customer, and all is in favor of the customer, so to say. Maybe in short, a little bit more aside. So responsible gambling, safer gambling, that is a start, definitely a start. But there are other things that are important as well, related to a certain extent to these topics. What do we do with anti-money laundering? Match fixing, information duties. What do you need to report? What is the role of AI, artificial intelligence? Getting back to loot boxes, the discussion we had a while ago. Crux voluntary. What's the position of the Gambling Authority regarding mandatory exclusion? So lots of questions that needs an answer for the operator, from the operator, and for you and me.
Yeah, thank you, Pieter. That's a lot of webinars coming up when I hear all these questions. A little bit deep dive into what you said previously, Pieter. Could you suggest one or more models for establishing cooperation between licensed online operators and addiction care and prevention professionals?
Well, what I think that most of the operators should do in any case is working together, of course, with the addiction care and prevention professionals and I always call them experts by experience. You have to create an advisory board, an advisory panel that meets on a regular basis and discusses what to do and how to do things. And again, there is a key role for the central management, for the CEO of the operator, because if he doesn't agree, then you do have a problem, so to say. So experiential experts, or better experts by experience, or maybe as the UK Gambling Commission has established, they have set up a lived experience advisory panel, which means that what we would call ervaringsdeskundigen, people that have experienced the gambling problem, are part of the group. There's another thing that is important, and that is make enough room for prevention specialists, so to say. I mean, as we know from research, and not only in this country, but in a lot of countries, there's only a limited percentage of people that are having problems is using the regular treatment facilities that are being offered. And that's in fact the same for the use of self-help groups within the AGOG self-help organization. But and honestly, I have nothing against treatment organizations. In fact, and self-help groups, but absolutely not. In fact, I've been a director of a treatment facility for a very long time when I was younger. And even in those days, there was a discussion within our treatment organization saying, should we work together with the self-help groups, which is not professional treatment? I've always been in favor of doing so, to say. But the focus should be, I think, when we start to talk about the things that we are doing, should be on prevention, and all those that don't use these treatment facilities, so to say.
Yeah.
So maybe it looks a bit like, as an example, the discussion that we had years ago when we did a responsible gambling project in South Africa. I was explaining the management of Sun International, what the content was of the projects that we were doing. And there was a bunch of psychologists in the room. And the psychologists raised their finger at one moment and said, can't we just wait until they are addicted, because then we can treat them? I mean, this is not the thing that we should focus on. We should focus on prevention, so to say. So maybe in short, should I say that treatment is the final piece of prevention? So really focus on prevention, please.
Yeah, prevention, and I guess also you suggested a lot of cooperation possibilities in your second answer, Pieter. Thank you very much. So, Pieter, we will see you later on. For you at home or in the office, if you have any questions to Pieter or the other participants, please scan the QR code on the top right of your screen, or go to slido.com, enter the event code #GIH, and participate in the question to the three experts, who we have the third of now here. And the next speaker is Emil Tybirk, who's an AI developer at responsible gaming solution provider Mindway AI from Aarhus. Emil, how are you? I'm not sure if we have voice from Emil.
Oh, sorry, that's my bad.
Here we are.
Is it going through?
How are you? Aarhus, Emil.
I'm quite good. Now with voice and everything is good here in Denmark. How about you, Willem?
Good, thank you. Yeah, good. Thank you for joining us, Emil. Emil, as you know, the Dutch regulations are focused to a large extent on prevention. That means in practice that somehow the behavior of individual players must be monitored. So question to you, what are some of the most frequently used approaches for creating player risk profiles and the monitoring of the player behavior, Emil?
I think currently the most common approach is actually manually based, going through Excel spreadsheets and so forth. But lately we've seen a lot of operators taking up more automated approaches, and that's definitely the way things are heading. And of the automated approaches, the most common approach would be to use in-house developed algorithms, typically based around some kind of risk marker or markers of harm setup. And this is what we've been trying to depict here on the left, where you can see, we could, for instance, imagine on one axis that we have total win and loss the latest month, and on the other axis you could have time consumption. Then if you fall under a certain threshold, then you will be flagged as a potential risk customer. And as you can probably imagine, this approach quickly becomes unmanageable because gambling data is really, really complex. There is a lot of factors, and no single factor can tell if a person is experiencing problems with gambling. And even then, if you exceed some of these thresholds, well, it's not certain that you have a problem. And if you're not exceeding them, well, you may as well have a problem, or you may be on the trajectory towards developing a problem. And as Pieter also said, I think it's really important to focus on prevention rather than treatment. So we want to catch customers before they actually move into the red area and actually start to consider interacting with the customer already when they are on the trajectory towards something that could be problematic.
Yeah.
And all of these things is I think a clear reason why there is a trend in the industry towards using AI, because AI can really manage really, really complex data and extract patterns from this complex data. The only thing is that you need some kind of target for the AI to aim for. And one of the most common approaches we've seen in the industry is that operators will be trying to predict which customers are likely to self-exclude in the future. The problem with trying to predict self-exclusion, for instance, is that, well, it's far from every customer who has a problem who will use self-exclusion. If that was the case, well, then not a lot of people would have these problems. And also, just even if you use self-exclusion, that does not mean that you have a problem necessarily. So self-exclusion as a target will not be ideal. And that is why we at Mindway have a board of experts who will go through individual player profiles of customers, looking into their behavior, how they have behaved on the website, assigning a risk score to individual customers, and also assigning explanations for the risk profile to make a full player profile. And this expert assessment can then be replicated in an algorithm such that the process can also be automated, because of course you do not want to have experts sitting and reviewing every single customer in a customer database. That's totally infeasible. But using this approach, we believe that there is a possibility for much earlier detection with much more precision, leading to less false negatives and also less false positives.
Okay. It's quite insightful, Pieter, Emil. Thank you. Also, as we've seen, and it was addressed before, it appears as it will take a lot of commitment from license operators to keep an eye on the playing behavior of all customers. How do you think, Pieter, Emil, can technology make player monitoring more effective and less intrusive?
I think the first step to make player profiling more effective, well, is to actually have be able to make accurate player profiles. So this ties a little bit back to the question I addressed before about how you actually make the profiling. Because if you cannot accurately assess a customer's risk level, well, then you cannot assign the correct intervention. As Sharif also explained, the severity of the intervention should match the playing behavior. So it's really important that you first of all have a clear player profile. And then the next step is, of course, to use this player profile in the right way. And well, an important step in that is to be able to measure the effect that the interactions you have with customers actually have. So here on the slide, you can see a depiction of an intervention for a group of customers where they have moved from the red group, and a lot of these customers have moved into a yellow or even a green risk group. So this is, of course, something that looks like a really effective intervention, and that's not something you would be able to expect in general. But being able to measure the actual effect of interactions through a risk score, well, that will help you deliver the right interaction for the right player profile at the right time. That's something that we see as a really important thing to measure these interactions. And the earlier you can start interacting with the customer, the better. So we ask, again, prevention rather than treatment, because it's also easier to affect the behavior of a customer who has not already developed a problem. So if you are in this vicious circle and have started developing a problem, it'll be harder to stop, and you will need more severe interactions or interventions with the customer.
Yeah. And
well, these interactions that you have with customers, it's of course also important that they are non-intrusive. And if you could just switch the slide. This is also one of the reasons that we at Mindway have invented a gamification of the classical self-test, which we have refined in a really close collaboration with our client Holland Casino. So we are presenting a self-test in the form of a game, which is much less intrusive than, for instance, answering a PTSI questionnaire. It does not contain sensitive questions and so forth. And well, it's a game, so it's much more engaging for the customer. It's much more likely that a customer will want to play a game to gain insight about their own gambling behavior than it is that they want to answer a self-test. So we believe that simply playing this game is a really great way of making these potential interaction much less intrusive and much more engaging.
Very good, Pieter, Emil. I think you have given us something, definitely a lot of things to think about. But please don't go away. While we go to the panel question now, if you have any questions to Pieter, Emil, or Sharif or Pieter, please use the Slido app, point your QR code to the right bottom of the screen, or go to slido.com and enter the event hashtag GIH. And you can, you see in the right top tab, the place where you can add your questions. We have, and welcome back Sharif and Pieter, question to the combined group of you. So from your single expertise, the three of us, and let's take 1 or 2, 3 minutes to answer this here. What can we reasonably expect regarding monitoring, intervention, technology, and regulations in the future? Sharif, quick opinion from you here.
Yes, well, it's a very broad question, but very quickly I would say, I think that when the dust settles on what is exactly needed and how the various requirements develop over time, when that's set, I think there will be a lot of room for technology-driven or automated monitoring mechanisms. But prior to that being fully developed, I think, in my personal view, there should be more clarity on what is exactly needed in order to be able to configure the technology in the right way.
Yeah. Okay. So
there are enough.
Yeah. So more precise decision making and then enabling the technology. Pieter, what do you think? What can we expect in the future?
Maybe I should start with regulations, so to say, if you don't mind, because I'm a little bit afraid. I'm a bit afraid of what's going to happen in the future, and I mean these are things that you can see nowadays already as well, also combined with COVID and regulators in all kinds of different countries that are going to take more precise measures related to what is allowed and what is not allowed. And honestly, all of a sudden this morning I remembered a talk of a famous professor from California in the USA called Nelson Rose. And Nelson Rose predicted in the late 80s that gambling would be prohibited in 30, 40 years from that moment on. And we are about getting to that time, so to say. Well, honestly, I know that online gambling didn't exist in the late 80s. It simply wasn't there because there were only land-based facilities, so to say. But what you do see is that advertising, marketing restrictions, spending limits, all kinds of things, that a lot of regulators in different countries are taking more measures to restrict or prohibit gambling, so to say. And I think in general that's not a solution, but I'll keep it for the moment, so to say.
Okay,
it's an observation.
In the future. Excellent. Pieter, Emil, what do you expect about the future? Maybe one of the topics you're expert in, but feel free to answer this either way.
Yeah, the trend we are seeing when talking to customers in different markets is that, as we have already addressed, that there is more and more focus on early detection and early interactions with the customers, because the regulators will increase their focus on that over time as well. So this, looking at a customer and a player profile and being able to very quickly identify signs of problematic gambling behavior, I think is something that will be a demand in increase over time. That's I think that's the main thing that we are seeing. And then of course also the different types of intervention. I think it's going to be more clear over time what can be expected. At least that's what we hope. And also more and more solution providers are starting to exist in the intervention space.
Yeah, an intervention. Well, I think it was really nice to hear your broad opinions about this open question here. So I'm sure there's more questions coming up in the Q&A here. Again, before we move to the Q&A here, finally, a quick reminder that you at home can submit your questions to our speakers through the Slido app or the slido.com website. Visit slido.com, enter the event code GIH, and use the Q&A tab on the top of your screen to submit your questions. So let's look at Slido for some of these questions that have been coming in here today. First question, something that Sharif already indicated in his second question. Verslavingskunde Nederland, that's a local care organization, recently called on its members to refuse future cooperation with online gambling operators. What does that mean for the sector? Pieter, Sharif, go a little bit deeper in what we discussed before.
Well,
yes. Okay. Now go ahead, Pieter.
Sharif, you first? Go ahead.
Pieter, you go ahead. You're from the sector, of course. So,
okay. Well, honestly, I used to work for Jelinek a very long time ago. Now, I'm aware of the discussion, and it's not different from a very long time ago where the addiction treatment organizations didn't want to work together with the industry itself, whether that was the alcohol industry, whether that was the gambling industry, so to say. I don't think that's the right move, because we are all stakeholders in an area that is dealing with the same issue, so to say. So for me, it's not a matter of saying, okay, no, we don't want to work together. We have to realize that we are all in it and that we do have to work together, so to say. And that is in the area of the formal treatment that is being offered, and that is in the area of the self-help, but that's in the area of being an operator as well and being a regulator as well, because we all have to deal with it. And honestly, I wouldn't know, would that be an exception, not with online gambling operators, but is working together with land-based operators not a problem? Or
Yeah, good question. So call for collaboration from you, Pieter. Thank you, Sharif.
Yeah, I agree with Pieter, and I was honestly quite surprised to read this. And because in the end, because of this, if this stays the way it is, in the end, the one who will suffer the most is the player who will be subject to addiction. I don't think indeed it's the right move.
Yeah, but maybe just to add, this is not new, so to say. I mean, I see a move like this happening in several other countries as well, where even within the group of experts or scientific experts, there sometimes is quite a big disagreement on what to do on or what not to do, so to say. So whereas the money come from related to scientific research, is this an independent organization or is it the industry? And is it the industry and what's the influence of the industry related to? So these are things that I do see happen in some other countries as well. And that doesn't mean that I'm happy with it. I'm absolutely not happy with it, but we might have to deal with it. Hopefully not.
Okay, so
I think the difficult thing here.
Sorry, Sharif.
I think the difficult thing here for operators, from the operator's perspective, is the law or policy rules say you should work together with these persons, and then the association representing exactly those persons says no, we will not cooperate, which creates a very strange relationship. So I can imagine it's very confusing.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sure it's not the last we heard of that, but at least there was a call and a willingness for collaboration on this panel here. So let's move to one of our next question. We've been coming in through Slido. Looking at the Slido question here. By the way, if you see a question that you like in Slido and you agree, you can upvote that question as well. And this is the next one. Looking at the expected number of online operators in the Dutch market, do we know the number of qualified responsible gaming experts available to this market? I guess Pieter or Sharif, you have an idea about that, an estimate?
Honestly, I don't think there are not a lot of people that could be qualified responsible gambling experts, or mentioned that way. It depends a bit on their background. I mean, if you look at the present operators that we have in this country, so let's say the lottery, the National Lottery, or Holland Casino, or the Fun, or those who are, definitely they have responsible gambling experts available. I think also a lot of the bigger international operators, online operators that run businesses in different countries, in different parts of the world, have responsible gambling experts as well. But at the very same time, I do realize that a lot of the operators that would like to get a license in the Dutch market, who are small or who are different and not familiar with the Dutch market, do have problems in finding an external qualified expert, so to say. And besides that, I think it's very important that the responsible gambling experts on the level of the operator should be part of the operator themselves. So this is that part.
Yeah. Sharif?
Yes, for me, from my perspective, I know they're scarce, but I wouldn't dare to put a number on it. But I do think operators considering entering the market, for them it would be wise to engage such experts as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess we can all agree. So with the KSA prediction of between 80 and 100 license holders, there's a scarcity in the market. If there's any expert out there that are watching this webinar and feel they can contribute something to the industry, please get in touch with Gaming in Holland or with either of the gentlemen on this webinar, and we will try to diminish the scarcity there. Let's look at the next question in Slido. Pieter, Emil, that's one for you. You've been quiet in the Q&A so far. What is the difference between using a wider, more complex range of risk markers and AI? So risk markers and AI on a wider perspective.
Yeah, so risk markers, the thing is that you have to define what will be the thresholds or what risk marker will correspond to which score. And you will somehow have to have a person to decide, to make these decisions, which risk marker should actually correspond to which increase in a risk score. And this task really quickly becomes extremely complex because there is tons of risk markers to take from. There is tons of different ways a customer can actually play. So doing this with risk markers quickly becomes too complex to manage from a data perspective, and creating the actual target, well, that's also really difficult. So using AI, well, it's still difficult to come up with a target, but if you have an AI approach, that's all you need. So you don't need to sit down yourself and define all the different risk factors and define the thresholds and define the way they interact. If you have a target, the AI can figure out, okay, what is the actual interaction? So yeah, that's what we do with having experts sitting down, reviewing customer data in detail and seeing, okay, this looks like problematic gambling behavior, but without being able exactly to tell that it's because this risk marker is above this and this and this, because it is the entire picture of a gambling pattern. And that's something you can leverage through AI.
Yeah, okay. So the manageability of the service by using your experts and AI. Thank you, Pieter, Emil. I guess there's space for one quick question towards the end before we wrap up this webinar. Last question here today. What if a problem player refuses to seriously engage with support staff or addiction care referrals? So refusal from the player part. I guess, Pieter, you're the best position to answer this question.
Well, honestly, at the end of the day, the player, him or herself, makes his own decision. So if he doesn't want the treatment being offered or the referral to treatment being offered, that's his decision. And I'll say this because I think we have to look at a lot of different options related to what we could offer the individual player. On the other hand, the operator has a responsibility, and I think that's very clear in the Dutch law as well. If we see people of whom we think they can't make a decision for themselves, we have to take over the responsibility to a certain extent. And I think the KSA even also makes operators responsible to a certain extent for the behavior of the individual player. That means that sometimes they have to take over this responsibility. That's why you have created crux for a voluntary exclusion, and that's why we also have crux to a certain extent for mandatory exclusions, where the operator in fact tells the gaming authority, I think this person should be excluded, but the KSA has to make a decision on that, whether that's going to happen or not. So you have your responsibility as an operator as well, but at the end of the day, it's the individual, and he has to agree on that, who makes a decision on what he would like to do.
Yeah,
and that's not only with gambling; that's with everything in life, to be honest.
Yeah. but since we speak about gambling in this webinar, but thank you,
Yeah,
Pieter. That was quite clear. Thank you. Maybe, Sharif, do you have anything to add from a legal perspective? Maybe, if not, it's also fine.
No, I agree with Pieter. You have, as an operator, you have your duty of care. You should comply with it, and the ultimate remedy is indeed the exclusion by means of crux.
Yeah, great. It's 15:44, and I think we're running out of time for the 45 minutes we set for this webinar. Let's wrap this up. Thank you, Sharif, Pieter, and Peter Emil for answering the viewers' questions and for your contributions to this webinar. Thank you very much.
thank you.
With this, we've come to an
Thank
end
you,
of
Willem.
yet another Gaming Holland webinar. I hope you found this useful. A link to a full recording of today's webinar will be shared in tomorrow's Gaming in Holland newsletter. As always, let's keep in touch. If you have not signed up for the newsletters and print magazines, you can do so at gamingin.eu. That's www.gamingin.eu. As I mentioned at the start, today's webinar concludes our current series. We'll be back with at least one new webinar on April 14th, most likely. In the meantime, please stay safe, and I hope to see you all, maybe in person again. Thank you.